No, that is on your own. Although I could be talked into, that was not good. I could be talked into another Saturday trip if you guys were interested.
We should go to Arizona.
Um,
Right, research station that has.
Yeah.
Quite a few species we don't see.
Do you think we have enough like lab money to cover that?
Yeah, you'll see it on your bill.
You know, I really think that the university should just give you a retirement gift of going to Arizona.
Yeah, they should buy me the chair of college.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Buy you the chair.
Just saying. Oh, okay.
It's that to the.
So I need to end class a little early today. So probably about 5 after. So help me to remember that because I have a medical appointment I got to run to. And I just need time to tear all this stuff down and such. I am thinking that I should be able to finish up this topic / chapter on Thursday. So we'll see. Yes.
Our exam isn't next week, but the week after, right?
Is that correct? Well, the exam won't happen until I think after I get through song. So, so if I need to move the date for it, I'll move the date for it. So, but I actually haven't looked that far ahead. To be honest with you, what is coming up though is next week. I believe conservation topics are due.
The topics or the reports?
The topics.
Okay.
I would say.
See, I was going for the fall on your knees effect again. So,
That was pretty fantastic.
yeah, it was. The only bad thing about it is I didn't get it on video because I mean that would have gone on the webpage. You know?
Yep.
Is this a crying face?
No, it's just a sad face. I think you said
So-
Frank. Wait, so when is it? Wait.
It's next week, I believe, is when they're due.
I don't see a list of topics to select from.
No, it's you guys pick your own topics.
Email you.
Yeah, just email me your topics. First come, first serve, and you know, yeah. I do need to approve the topics. Because my goal will be to keep you from picking a topic that is so broad that you will need 4 or 5 weeks to present it. So,
Wait, so they're due as in like they have to be approved by next Tuesday?
no, you need to submit them and then we will, if we need to work on narrowing, we will do it at that point. So. Are you knitting your notes today?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. All righty. Are we ready to start?
I gotta find the slide.
We're waiting on Whitney.
Yeah. Slide are we on?
Keep going. One more. There you go.
Okay, I'm ready.
You're ready. Okay, cool. All right, so last time we finished up, we were talking about how physiological changes in birds over the course of the annual cycle can impact what the Scholander Irving curve for the bird looks like. And you guys did a good job of pointing out all of the changes that occurred between summer and winter. And so today we want to look at another type of an adaptation that birds can have, particularly birds that live in cold climates, to help them actually avoid hypothermia. And these data that I'm going to show you now for American goldfinches come out of Dave Swanson's lab. Dave is an alumni of George Fox. He is at the University of South Dakota, and he is the same kind of biologist I am. And he's a fun guy to hang out with. We go birding whenever he comes to Sickbee. I haven't seen him at Sickbee in several years though, and I really, I'm unclear. Well, maybe he's retiring even. Beats me. But anyway, yeah, I met him when I was at a Cooper Ornithological Society meeting in Oklahoma, early in my career here, and he comes up to me and introduces himself and says, you know, I'm a George Fox alumni. And I said, cool. And you know, he even had some sort of a card, you know, that from like organic chemistry said he, you know, says a Paul Chamberlain fan or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, you know, and he and I went birding on that trip and struck up a friendship that's lasted for a lot of years. And like I say, I haven't seen him for quite some time. But anyway, this comes out of his lab. Eric Lightness is I think his first name is Eric. It was a PhD student of Dave's, and these are some data that they generated many, many years ago. This is a publication from 2002. And what these data illustrate is an example of how some birds that exist and have to tolerate cold climates will do so and avoid becoming hypothermic by increasing their metabolic rate, or increasing how much they can elevate their metabolic rate is a better way to say it. And the maximum metabolic rate that a bird can experience, and I suppose even a mammal would be fine this way, but the maximum metabolic rate that a bird can experience when they are exposed to extreme cold is what we call their summit metabolism. Now, you know, there are actually a couple of ways that people look for the maximum metabolic rate of an organism. One is just to expose them to extreme cold, get them to invest as much as they can into thermal regulation, and then you can kind of see where that peaks out. The other way is just to engage them in extreme exercise and see just how hard they can exercise before they hit their peak. Those two values don't always end up in the same place, and so they've gone to kind of separating those maximal values out based on how they were measured. And so in this case, summit metabolism is the maximum metabolic rate in response to extreme cold. When summit metabolism increases, it appears that birds are better able to maintain their body temperature in cold temperatures, so they avoid hypothermia, and they can do this at lower temperatures. And so this graph here is data on American goldfinches, basically over winter, spring, and summer. These open dots right here are the cold tolerance limit, and so TCL means cold temperature tolerance limit. And you can see that in the winter, it's the lowest. In the summer, it is the highest. These bars here represent the summit metabolism for American goldfinches, and you can see that they are inversely related. So in the winter, the birds can tolerate the most extreme cold temperatures. You can see they're probably down around -10 degrees. And they have the highest summit metabolism. During the summer, they can tolerate down to probably 2 degrees right there, and they have the lowest summit metabolism. And so they establish this link between summit metabolism and their ability to tolerate and maintain body temperature at low temperatures. Does that make sense? That was a pretty wordy explanation, but hopefully got the point across. All right, any questions about this? All right, now on the flip side of the coin, some birds actually utilize hypothermia. Isn't that right, Emily? Some birds actually utilize hypothermia to save energy and use this as a means of tolerating extreme cold temperatures. And so in this case, what they'll do is they'll reduce metabolic rate and also body temperature, and this reduces their energetic costs. And so they are adapted to tolerate low body temperatures. All right. And you see we have a picture of a hummingbird here, so you know that we're heading towards a conversation about torpor at some point. But low body temperatures that can be tolerated by birds, and specifically hummingbirds, get down to around 3 degrees C, which is really pretty low. And I believe there are some mammals that can even tolerate body temperatures that are lower than that. And so this is a way of not having to have a high metabolic cost, but still being able to make it through, say, the night or the winter when temperatures are really cold. All right. So this is a useful strategy for avoiding the need to thermoregulate, spend energy on thermal regulation at cold temperatures. And the ability to become hypothermic, as you have heard, at least the three of you have heard in many talks, has been shown in a whole bunch of different bird species, more than 200 bird species. I don't know what the exact count is now. I'm sure this increases annually. All right. And here are just a few examples of birds. Hummingbirds are a champion in this regard. But this here is, I think it's a porwheel here, and this is a this may be one of the species of tits, which is basically a chicken. So just to give you an idea of how diverse birds are that can utilize hypothermia, this here is a plot of skin temperature, so surface temperature, of two species of owls, Scott's owls. And these data were measured out of Andrew McKechnie's lab. And you can see for one species here, the African Scott's owl, that early in the morning, they will engage in a short bout of shallow torpor. So you can see they're reducing their body temperature down here, probably about 5 degrees. And doing that for a short period of time, presumably in order to save a little energy. You know, maybe they didn't have you know, the greatest day for energy intake the previous day. Maybe they had a warm night and spent a little more energy than they had planned to, whatever. But this is a tool that they can use to balance their energy budget. Okay. Of course, as we all know, the champions of daily torpor are hummingbirds. This here is the Andean hill star, and these data come from a paper published by Lynn Carpenter back in 1974. I believe this is actually part of her PhD. And until recently, when Blair Wolf went and measured some torpor minimum body temperatures in hummers up in Ecuador, this was the lowest body temperature measured in any hummingbird. Now, the key thing here is we have body temperature on the y-axis here and time of day on the x-axis here. And then, well, actually, we should say temperature, because we're plotting both ambient and body temperature on this graph. So you can see that ambient temperature starts off about 18 degrees right here. We'll dip down probably to around, I would guess, around 2 degrees down here. This is degree C. And then come back up at the end of night when the sun comes back up. If we track what the hummingbirds are doing during this time, their body temperature starts around 40 degrees. And then at night, they drop quickly into torpor. Now, the thing I want to point out here is note that once body temperature approaches ambient temperature, the rate of decline in body temperature pretty much parallels ambient temperature for a period of time. And this is because the loss of heat, the cooling of their body temperature, is a passive process. So it's being driven by the thermal gradient, which means that the body temperature can never get below ambient temperature. All right. The other interesting thing here, though, is that although ambient temperature continues to drop, note that body temperature does not. It plateaus out here, in this particular case, about 4 degrees. Although the exact value is interesting to me because, you know, when you read the paper, suggests it might be 5.5 degrees, but these data suggest 4 degrees. So, you know, but it's down there. The key thing here is that body temperature stabilizes, and I'll show you why it stabilizes in a moment. And then when ambient temperature rises again, the body temperature will rise in parallel with ambient temperature until the bird arouses from torpor, and then you get a rapid rise in body temperature until it becomes normothermic again. This is, to the best of my knowledge, the only study of torpor on free living hummingbirds that doesn't involve something on a nest. And the reason why this bird can be studied, because finding birds in torpor is really hard. But the reason why this bird can be studied is because they roost in caves. And so Lynn, you know, was out wandering around the Andes, found a cave and found all these Andean hill stars that were roosting in the cave. And so she knows where the roost is. She walks in there, sticks a thermocouple up their Yahoo and measures their body temperature, and was able to collect these data. And this is still a widely cited paper in the world of torpor. Yeah.
How did that not disturb them? Like,
Oh, I'm sure it did.
Did you take continuous measurements throughout the night?
I'm sure it did, and actually probably not. My guess is she was probably pretty strategic or purposeful when she took body temperature measurements. I'm sure she was focusing on body temperature measurements during this period when the temperatures were the coldest, so that you could see just how cold the hummingbirds actually were.
So this isn't like for one individual, it's like an average.
Yeah, I'm sure she collected data on multiple individuals, because there were multiple individuals in the cave. That's my recollection anyway. It's been a while since I've read this paper. All right. So here are also some classic data from Reed Hainsworth and Larry Wolf, even earlier, from back in the 1970s. It's a classic plot of oxygen consumption versus ambient temperature. Basically, a portion of the Scholander-Irving curve here for birds, both that are normothermic as well as in torpor. And these are laboratory studies. And so if you see here, what you're looking at here, this is probably the start of the thermal neutral zone right here. And then this is below the lower critical temperature, and you can see that the data are following this nice linear trend, as you would expect for an endothermic animal. The interesting thing, though, is that when the birds go into torpor, you can see that metabolic rate is dropping with temperature here, because there is a temperature effect on metabolic rate. It's dropping with temperature until the temperature hits a particular level. And then note what happens. The temperature begins to rise again, and the metabolic rate begins to rise again. And this rise in metabolic rate parallels the rise in metabolic rate for normothermic birds. And so it has the same slope. And so the slope, again, remember, relates to thermal conductivity. And so what this presumably means is the birds have the same thermal conductivity when they're in torpor as they do when they are normothermic. But the key thing to note here is that this point where metabolism begins to rise again is the point at which they hit their minimum body temperature. So the fact that body temperature becomes stable at a given temperature, in this particular bird, I think this is either a black chin or a Ribley's. I don't remember which. And I think it's a Ribley's, because I think it actually might be the tropical version of what was, and then actually they're not Ripley's anymore because they've split them, but they look very similar to Ripley's. This here around 18 degrees would be the minimum body temperature. And the fact that metabolic rate is increasing means that they are defending that minimum body temperature. So torpor is not 100% a passive process. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I feel like this is a question I should already know the answer to, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. How does the cost for arousal from torpor, relate to the energy savings from like a night of torpor?
Well, clearly it doesn't destroy it, otherwise they wouldn't, they wouldn't do it. You know, it is a pretty substantial energy cost. But the hummingbird actually has, it actually has adaptations to increase heat production. So one of the things that hummingbirds will do while they, you know, in preparation for torpor, is they will produce a lot of decoupling proteins. You know what a decoupling protein is?
I remember it slightly from Anusha's talk, but I don't know specifically.
So what a decoupling protein does is you know, so during oxidative phosphorylation, you create these hydrogen gradients, which then basically turn the ATP turbine, kicking out ATP. And so what uncoupling proteins do is they decouple that process, so that that hydrogen gradient is actually dumping a lot of heat. So for a short period of time, you just really kick your heat production up, which presumably is probably less costly in the long run than trying to do it some other way through muscle activity or something else. And what I would liken it to is that a lot of open water fish, you know, like tunas and billfish, actually have specialized types of muscles that do not contract, but actually separate the process of driving muscle contraction from the process of using energy to drive it. So basically they take the ATP and start using the ATP just to generate heat. And so it's actually kind of a form of endothermy in fish, but it's very localized in tissues that they want to keep warm, like their brains.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that. And so they have adaptations which I think enhance their ability to heat up really, really fast, so that they can get out of torpor with probably as economically as you can possibly do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other questions? All right. The use of hypothermia in birds is actually a really complex deal, and we're finding that it's a lot more complex than even we originally thought. And this came out of one of Anusha's dissertation publications right here, where we were looking at the use of shallow torpor in hummingbirds, because nobody had ever seen that before. So basically we have you know, endotherms like humans that just stay normothermic all the time, maybe drop their body temperature a degree or two at night while they're sleeping. Then you have some birds that will use shallow torpor but don't have the capacity to use really deep torpor. Then the dogma with regard to hummingbirds were that they always use just deep torpor. But then through a series of experiments that we did, we discovered that hummingbirds in some cases actually can use a form of deep torpor. And this is an interesting piece of information that hopefully will get pursued a little farther, because one of the big questions about the use of deep torpor, particularly in birds like hummingbirds in some species which may use it a lot, is that hypothermia is not generally considered to be a restful state. Because all of the metabolic processes that you engage in when you're sleeping to basically restore a normal state in your cell. I mean, you're clearing out all kinds of things that your cells have accumulated over the course of the day. You're repairing any cellular damage that's occurred. You're restocking up on proteins that you need to do normal daytime thing. You're doing a lot of that kind of stuff at night while you're sleeping, because that's when you can invest the energy in it, because you're not doing anything else. And we've always been interested to know how do hummingbirds or other organisms that use deep torpor deal with this. In mammals, what you see in mammals that are in deep hypothermia for an extended period of time, you'll see them aroused periodically in order to kind of clean out their systems and then drop back down into deep torpor. But that's not something we see with these birds. And it's possible that using some shallow torpor is helpful in this regard, because during shallow torpor, the birds seem to be capable of a lot of very normal physiology that more resembles sleep than deep torpor. The amount of shallow torpor that is used by different species is dependent a lot on the species, and we see it most often in birds that are very territorial. Well, I should say in one species that's very territorial. I guess we can't really extend this any farther than that, where most of the time they're hypothermic. And that's the pink right here. It's shallow torpor. They use very, very little deep torpor. And that's in the green right here. But then you look at something like the black chin, which is the most subordinate species, and they use deep torpor almost all the time. So the different species will use different species depending on their own social position or whatever, how hard is it for them to meet their daily energy budget. That can dictate how much time they actually spend in deep torpor. Because there are risks to being in deep torpor, such as, you can't run away from a predator. But there are physiological consequences potentially as well. Here, these are just pictures. Everybody with Shondor has probably seen these a zillion times. And you know what, I probably wouldn't have tossed all these in there for you guys because you see them a lot, but most of the time I don't have people who have seen these a lot in my class. Normal thermic bird, these are thermal images. You can see they're just kind of lit up all night. Here's a shallow torpid bird, not quite as lit up, but they're still cooler. And then deep torpor, when they're in deep torpor, you can't hardly separate them from the background because they're very, very close to ambient temperature. Yeah.
Is the temperature scale in all of these like normalized to be the same?
I believe so. That is what when we were talking about this, that's why I said we had to do. So I'm assuming that we did do it, because otherwise that makes it difficult to track these. And the difference in the colors here would represent, they're different nights, and so the nighttime temperatures were different in all these, so we end up with different background colors. This night is clearly the warmest of the three of these. All right, before we get into a discussion of bills finally and feeding, Bergman's rule. Bergman's rule is a rule that states that if you've got a species that has a broad south to north range, that the farther north you go, i.e. the colder climate that you get into, the larger your body size is going to be. Okay. And the reason for this is that with a larger body size, you reduce your surface to volume ratio. So thermal regulation is going to be quite a bit easier. The classic example of this, here you go, Whitney, downy woodpecker.
Heck yeah.
Okay. Downy woodpeckers range clear from, the south, the very warm south, southeast, mid-continent south, clear up to the very cold parts of the states, and actually they even range into Canada. And there is a clear body size climb that goes from being smallest down south to largest up north. And I have seen downy woodpeckers, across this entire range, and you do noticeably see them as being bigger when you see them up north. Yeah.
Just want to double check that I'm getting this right. This would also, like in the southern hemisphere, the further south you go would be larger too, right?
Yeah, that would be true. Although I honestly have never seen an example of Bergman's rule applied in the southern hemisphere, but I would suspect that that's probably true.
Okay. It feels-
I have seen it with mammals, so.
Okay. And does it also apply to like lower versus higher elevation?
That's a good question, and I have not seen anything that suggests that. And my suspicion would be that birds have an easy time moving, along an elevational gradient. They probably have a lot harder time moving from, Louisiana up to Lake Michigan.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So. Okay. All right, let's shift gears and talk about bills. The bill of a bird is really an interesting structure because, it's this thing that replaces teeth. Birds don't have teeth. They have shed teeth in order to lighten their load for flight. And so it's a very important adaptation for feeding. And you guys have seen enough birds where you know that the size and the shape of bills varies dramatically. And it's going to vary largely based on what the bird's diet is. Even so, all bills of birds need to, at some level, be multifunctional because to the best of my knowledge, there is no bird that consumes one food item for its entire life or even an entire annual cycle. So, when you look at a bird like a chickadee, which is primarily designed to eat insects. They will at certain times of the year eat seeds. Their bill does reflect that because it's not long, or it's not longer and slender like you would see in a warbler or a vireo or a kinglet, but rather they're shorter and a little stouter. And that's because it probably helps them to accommodate seeds during certain times of the year. Okay. So some primary features of the bill: the upper mandible, this piece right here, and the inside of the bill is bone. Right? And so another name that we will use for the upper mandible is maxilla. The lower mandible, or dentary, down here. Jaw muscles, and there's a whole bunch of them that are used to manipulate the bill and necessary for biting, grabbing, ripping, and even swallowing to some degree. Then what makes the bill really interesting externally is this structure called the rhamphotheca. And the rhamphotheca is a proteinaceous sheath that covers the bony portion of the bill. And this is going to be what gives the bill its color. This is what is going to give the bill any special shapes or features, such as if you look in the merganser here, you can see these serrations on the bill. Okay, that's part of that proteinaceous rhamphotheca. Notches, whatever. Because once you take that off, it's just bone. The upper mandible can flex. So most birds will have a joint right between the mandible and the frontal bone right here. And this forms what's called or allows a flexing, which we call a craniokinesis. And so the hinge here is called the nasofrontal hinge. Now, there are some birds that can actually flex down the middle of that upper mandible. And they will have a dorsal ridge that will allow it to do, if you're looking straight at the bill, it'll allow it to do this. And this ability to flex is really designed to protect the bill, to keep it from breaking because you're putting too much pressure on it. So you can consider it kind of like a shock absorber. All right, so now we're going to go through a long list of descriptive terms of bills. And the thing to understand about these terms that we're going to go through is that you don't need to use only one of these terms to describe a bill, and often you will use multiple terms to describe a bill. Okay, so a bill is considered long if the bill is longer than the head is wide. So a hummingbird, I should say many hummingbirds, because this is not true for all hummingbirds. There are some hummingbirds that actually have fairly short bills. I like this because you can also see that hummingbirds are not born with long bills. They're born with short bills, and bills rapidly grow, and this allows the mother to feed the babies without getting impaled. Here's American woodcock. You can see again a long bill. Okay, a short bill. Okay, it's just the exact opposite. It's a bill that is going to be shorter than the head is wide. So here we have a chickadee or a tit. I don't remember. I don't think. I think this is one of the European tits, but it's the same thing as a chickadee. They just call it something different. And a titmouse, which is in the same family. And you can see this is a good example of what I was just explaining about their bills here. You can see the bills are short, but they've got a little stoutness to them. And this is to accommodate a diversity, some diversity in their diet. And chickadees actually have quite a bit of diversity in their diet. Okay, actually, this is a Carolina chickadee. I even wrote it here. So there you go. All right. So here we can watch black-capped chickadees, although that does not look like a black-capped chickadee to me. That looks like a Carolina chickadee to me. Coming in and getting seeds. Now, the reason why I put this video on here is what I want you to know is that they're being selective in what seeds they take out of the hand. They're not coming and taking those big sunflower seeds, which would be way too big for them to handle. He could probably buy a feeder and save himself from having to stand there all winter. All right. So using terminology to describe the morphology of the bill is useful when you're making comparisons between birds. So on Saturday, we got to see greater yellowlegs, and that's this bird right here. It's possible we go to Mount here, and likely, in fact, that we will get to see lesser yellowlegs. And once in a while, we actually get to see them standing right next to each other, which is really instructive. That, along with snow and Ross's geese, that also is really instructive. But one of the characteristics of the greater yellowlegs is that their bill is long. Okay, it's longer than the head is wide. The lesser yellowlegs, the bill is about equal to its head length. And the difference is actually quite distinct. So, it's one of the ways that makes it easy to tell them apart, plus the lesser is smaller. Okay. One of the things I wanted to say, the purpose of their bills is, again, it supports their mechanism for feeding. They're probers. They probe mud, sand. And so here we'll get to watch a shorebird using bill. Just probing the mud, looking for, worms, arthropods, or whatever they can find. So you can see that it's very useful for that. Okay, another good comparison is between hairy and downy woodpeckers. So we've just got Whitney. Yeah, we do Whitney smiling like crazy today.
That's because we actually saw a hairy woodpecker and ID'd it based on this feature.
The hairy woodpecker has a longer bill, and now we can use these terms for relative comparison as well. You'd be hard pressed, I think, to describe this bill as being long by the classical definition, because I don't think it's longer than its head is wide. But the downy woodpecker's bill is absolutely shorter. It is shorter than the head is wide. So, you know, we could say legitimately that the hairy woodpecker has a longer bill than the downy woodpecker. The other thing about the hairy woodpecker too is the bill actually tilts up just a smidge. Okay, another term that we can use to describe a bill is whether or not it's straight. So the technical definition for a straight bill is that when the bill is closed, that the axis of the bill lines up with the axis of the head. In other words, you can draw a straight line between the back of the head and the tip of the bill. Right? But if I were going to describe this bill based on what we've said so far, what else might you say about the bill? It's long. So here's a case where we would use two descriptors. We would call the bill long and straight. And this bill is useful for supporting the way that this bird feeds, and it's a grabber. You know, it shoots its head out. Its neck almost acts like a spring to shoot out and grab prey, and that bill, it's got a little stoutness to it, and it's good for grabbing onto things. And so we can watch this great egret right here. Early on, the great egret's going to be boring, but in a moment, you know, and this is the way egrets and herons will feed. They will sit there very, very still. And sometimes what they will do on a sunny day is they'll actually raise their wings to shade the water so they can actually see into the water. Now, they don't always just feed in the water though. Sometimes they will feed on land as well. And you'll see this one doing that in a second, where I think it's grabbing frogs. You see how perfectly still they sit, just waiting for some unsuspecting fish. So now it's going to come out. It's not having any luck in the water. So there you go. See, it grabs that, and I think that's a frog that it grabs. And you know, they swallow it whole because they can't chew. Sneaking up. Gonna get it again. Boom. And so that bill is well designed for that type of feeding.
And the thing that was going was the gular pouch, right?
No, that was more of its throat.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that they don't really have a gular pouch. I think the bottom of their bill, the gular pouch is going to be, it's going to be associated with the lower mandible. And I think that was just its throat as it was swallowing the frog's whole. Okay, our next descriptor is hooked. And a hooked bill is when the upper mandible is longer than the lower mandible, and the tip of it bends down in front of the lower mandible. And so this is something we see in birds of prey as well as parrots. Although the uses for the bill are quite different between the two. Birds of prey, it's a ripping and tearing sort of bill. You know, it's the closest thing that they can get to chewing. So they're going to rip things into little pieces. And parrots, I mean, they use that bill for a lot of things, but they actually even use their bill for climbing. You've ever seen a parrot? You know, they'll grab onto something with their bill and yank themselves up. Parrots also have very fleshy tongues that they use in eating a lot. Yeah.
Would this also include like things like a merganser that has the little tiny hook at the end? Or like those hummingbirds that have a little tiny?
No,
Okay.
I suspect that those are for, yeah. You know. I suppose you could use, if it's, you call it mildly hooked,
Okay,
but I mean, these descriptors are to try to articulate as best you can as to what the structure of a bill is. And so if that's helpful in describing it, sure. But in terms of functionality, it wouldn't, you know, it may serve some purpose in territory defense or something like that. But these have a broader functionality and something like that with. And here is a red-tailed hawk. Got some takeout and is, you know, having some lunch. A little Chick-fil-A. All right. So next, yes.
It almost looks like the hawk was doing a sort of chewing motion, but like.
Well, what it is, it's not really chewing. What it is they're taking little hunks of the tissue and they are in essence tossing it into the back of their bill where they can swallow it. Because you know, they have no, I mean, I tell you this, so you know, you'll see them tilt, you know, run their head back and to kind of throw the meat back into the back of their mouth. Where they can use their muscles to swallow it, yeah.
Do birds that do that not have like muscular tongue? Like a sort of mechanism to like.
They do, but the tongue, in the case of these birds, it's not something like they can go out and lick their bill. And their tongues don't work that way. And a hawk does not have the same type of fleshy tongue that a parrot has. Parrots actually can manipulate quite a bit of stuff around their bill with, they still can't stick their tongue out and lick their chops, but I mean, they can manipulate things in their mouth with their tongue pretty easily. All right, the next descriptive term, depressed. And the term depressed refers not to their mental state, but rather to the fact that the bill is wider than it is high. So it's dorsal ventrally flat. And so ducks are a classic example of this. Yes.
Just to make sure. When you say wider, that's like. Wider than it is.
Yes.
Okay. The one on the right certainly looks depressed, that's all I'm saying. I mean, both of their bills look pretty blue to me.
So anybody know what species this is?
Sorry,
No, it is not.
the scar.
It is. Which one?
Lesser.
No.
it's a great Scott.
It's a European. No, it's a greater. And how do you know it's a greater Scott besides the process of elimination?
Is it because it's, like, do they have longer bills than lesser Scott?
Look how round that head is.
Oh, it has a round head.
Are the lessers this way or this way?
It depends on whether they're diving or not.
When they're like that.
Well, you need to be more descriptive about what you know, your hand motions.
Okay, is it like? So if the round head is what tells you this is a greater Scott. Does the lesser Scott have a?
As a kind of a peak.
Okay,
It's kind of a peak on its head. It's not as dramatic as it is on the ringneck.
okay,
But you know this is not a ringneck because there's no white ring on that bill.
Wait,
And there's no white stripe on the shoulder.
Is the one on the left of American Legion?
The one on the left is an American widget. All right, so these bills are useful for both diving and dabbling. Both of the birds, actually, and the two I showed you in the previous slide, one's a diver and one's a dabbler. If you look along the inner edge, of the upper mandible, the bill is serrated. And so for what dabbling ducks do is they will take water into their mouth and squirt it out the sides of the bill. And that will allow them to strain plant matter out of the bill, because they eat a lot of plant matter. And that's what that bird's doing right there. But we don't care about that yet. Okay, that's enough. All right, so the next descriptive character is a bill can be either spatulate or spoon shaped. They both mean the same thing. And what this indicates is that the bill is wider at the tip and generally depressed at the tip than it is at other parts of the bill. And so the shoveler and this spoon bill right here are an example of these spatulate or spoon shaped bills. Now, if I were to show you this bird and tell you to describe the bill for me, how would you describe it?
Spatulate.
Yeah, okay, since we use that as an example. Long
Right.
and depressed, yes, exactly.
The bill theoretically would have a straight bill, but we can't tell how the same.
It actually does. It actually does have a straight bill, so you could add that on there as well. Now, the other interesting thing about spoonbills, and I'll show you a picture of them feeding in the next slide, is they have more nerve endings in the tip of their bill because they're actually going below the water and feeding in the mud where they can't always see. And those nerve endings presumably allow them to feel with the tip of their bill.
So do all spoon shapes have that? Like.
No. No, I don't, the shoveler wouldn't have that.
Where are these found?
You can see them down in like Florida, you can see them in the South, New Orleans, around there. I have seen these.
So what exactly is the benefit of the spoon shape?
They are feeding in the muddy bottom in the water right there. And so it probably just gives them wider so they can get more mud at any one time. They don't need to have the whole bill that wide. They just need to have where it's interfacing with the mud.
Another question I should probably know. Why does the shoveler have that shaped bill then? Same.
I haven't the foggiest idea.
Okay,
Probably because, you know, it knits his notes like you.
yeah. I think my bill is pretty spoon shaped, so that makes sense.
There. So, okay, next character. Lest we dive into extreme silliness here. Gibbous. So some birds, and actually there's going to be one bird that we see that is dramatically like this. This is the black scoter right here. And it has this big hump on the base of the bill, and this is referred to as being a gibbous bill. And you know, it's just another descriptive character. So you know, you may be able to, you know, there are some other birds that may have something like this that's less pronounced. You know, turkeys, for example, have a little bit of a hump at the base of the bill, and so you know, so one might be able to describe that as slightly gibbous. A bill can be compressed, so this is the opposite of depressed. So a compressed bill is laterally flattened. So like here in the puffin right here, the kingfisher also has a compressed bill, only you can't see that quite as easily as you can with the puffin right here, right? But their bill is somewhat laterally flattened. And the bill for the puffin right here is really useful in helping it to hang on to actually several small fish at one time. So let's watch a little video about the Atlantic puffins.
On a sunny summer day, I went west of an island seeking fish in the surroundings. Despite the placid appearance, this was in fact one of the most volatile leaflet on earth. Nice. Earthquakes and eruptions occur frequently. And the land above and below the sea is in a constant state of flux. Landscape is not the only thing changing in the Western Islands. Something mysterious is happening on the islands as well as the inhabitants. The Atlantic puffin.
And puffins have actually been dying, and they found them next to the holes, and they feel that they've been starving.
But their wants will be a blow for their neighbors. Eat, but eat.
Puppet plays a huge role in culture of this society. Has a place in the heart of everybody.
So it is so important that hopefully things improve.
Throughout history, birds have been abundant here. High grass seeds provide ideal nesting grounds. In the seas, it offered up a steady supply of fish from year to year. It's been the almost ideal spot for Atlantic puffins. Over time, they've been tied to this place. This is one of the world's largest colonies, with an estimated 1.3 million nesting pairs. They spend most of the year at sea, returning to land in the spring to rear a single chicken. But for the past 3 years, something's gone wrong. Almost none of the puffins are breeding. Researchers say they think they know the root of the problem. Historically, catch records indicate a severe decline of puffins' favorite food, a small, nutritious fish known as the sandpipes. But for the last 3 years, it's been scarce in areas where it used to be abundant. The fish has also shown up late in the puffins' breeding season. Puffins are not the only birds that may be affected by the loss of sandpipes. Other Icelandic seabirds also had breeding problems for the same 3-year period.
It was kind of sad to experience this for a year in a row. With the breeding failure. Close to that, no wonder so that's going to continue.
Biologists Bear Burgess observed that some birds have breeding distances to find food. Many of them did not reproduce, and those that did reproduce held on until very late in the season, perhaps waiting for feeding conditions to improve. Desperation, some breeding birds have tended to eat their offspring other times of vision that the youngsters can't manage.
The sand seaweed, the tiny little fish that puffins are used to eating, haven't been available. They've seen puffin parents come in with large herring, but the little babies can't swallow them, so they can't eat that.
Researchers believe loss in sandbanks may be climate change. In Iceland, ocean temperatures have increased by 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit as we have used. Studies are the only ones being affected by global warming. But researchers say this colony is strength, since it's one of the largest in the world. It's true, birds have one unique advantage over other species they compete in surroundings. They fly away. These studies may do so. Seeking out new nesting grounds, it would boost my eyes continues to thrive. When changing temperatures, breeding turmoil, across the world. The Western Islands, puffins have breeding spree. Changes.
Okay, we'll see if I get a copyright hit for that when I try to publish this. I haven't gotten very many copyright hits this year, so maybe things are getting old. Some of these videos are getting old enough where people don't care anymore. Okay, so we talked about straight bills, but not all bills are straight. Some birds have bills that curve upward, such as this godwit right here and this avocet right here. And when a bill curves upwards, we call that recurved. Okay. And there are several birds that have a recurved bill. This avocet is one of the champions, though. That thing just really curves up. And here is an American avocet. You can see it even better right here. And what I want you to do is I want you to watch how it feeds when it starts feeding. You have to watch it quickly because it moves its head fast when it does this. It's not the prober that a lot of shorebirds are. We're ready. So what this bird is doing is it's going down to the bottom and it's sweeping its bill from side to side. And so that curvature allows the tip of the bill to fit flat on the bottom. And so it sweeps it side to side, and that's how it feeds. And so this being recurved is helpful in this regard. All right. The opposite of being recurved is decurved, and this is when the bill curves down. So this is a long-billed curlew. We'll see lots of those when we go to Mount here, but we've already seen brown creepers, which also have a slightly decurved bill as well. The actually brown creepers are probers, so even with a decurved bill, they will probe. And the creeper actually gleans things out of the bark of the trees. Woodpeckers, they have what's called a chisel-like bill. And being chisel-like is when you have a beveled tip. So you can kind of think of this as being somewhat shaped like a chisel. You know, where you have that slightly expanded flattened area on the end that's just using for making holes in or cavities in trees. And so here is a pileated woodpecker doing some work on this tree right here. I think I've got a video of a smaller woodpecker that follows this. Anytime. Okay, I guess there we go. All right, and maybe we'll end with this. The hummingbird has this long, somewhat tubular bill that we refer to as being terete. And so if you were to take a cross section of the bill, it would kind of be V-round. It's not exactly round. But anyway, this is a bill that is designed for probing, just like the long bills of sandpipers are. But in their case, they're probing into flowers. And then they also have a specialized tongue that helps them extract nectar. And we will talk about that. I'll show you some videos of that next time. So we will stop there. Questions?
This was just a pretty broad question, but it popped into my mind. We're talking about sets, but is there like a general like do behaviors and morphology evolve at the same time, or does one see the other, or is it just like case by case?
That's an interesting question. I think that the timing of when any particular trait evolves is going to depend when selection favors the trait. So if a bill morphology and a behavior are both required to increase fitness, then presumably they would both evolve at the same time. So my suspicion is, well, actually, that suspicion isn't the right word. My speculation is the timing is not identical between them. And you know, since they involve a whole different suite of genes, the timing of their evolution probably is not the same either.
Okay, so you don't think that they like just like occur at the same time?
I suspect not. They may occur close to the same time. Again, it depends on whether the thing that is improving their fitness, so what selection is driving to happen, requires both of them. If it requires both of them, then selection will push their development simultaneously.
Yeah,
But how fast even if that happens, they may not develop at the same rate. Because it probably depends on the complexity of the genetics that's involved with that. My suspicion is actually, you may be able to develop bill morphology a lot more quickly than you can develop behavioral shifts. Because bill morphologies can change pretty fast. Darwin's finches are a good example of that. Okay.